The Cuban Missile Crisis, background, the edge of nuclear war, and the aftermath. Background: how the world reached the brink. The Cold War climate. By the early 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global ideological struggle: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus authoritarianism. Both superpowers were racing to expand influence, build alliances, and stockpile nuclear weapons. The Cuban Revolution. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the US-backed Batista regime. Castro aligned with the Soviet Union, nationalized American-owned industries, and openly embraced communism. Washington saw this as an existential threat, a communist state just 90 miles from Florida. The Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961. The CIA trained Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro. President Kennedy approved the operation, but it failed disastrously. Castro emerged stronger and more paranoid. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev saw an opportunity: protect Cuba and shift the nuclear balance. Why the Soviets placed missiles in Cuba? Khrushchev had several motives. Counter-US missiles already placed in Turkey and Italy. Protect Cuba from another American invasion. Gain strategic leverage in the Cold War. By mid-1962, the Soviets secretly began installing medium and intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Cuba, capable of striking most of the continental United States. The tense period, 13 days on the edge of nuclear war. Discovery. On October 14, 1962, a US U-2 spy plane photographed missile sites under construction in Cuba. When Kennedy saw the images, he understood instantly: if these missiles became operational, the nuclear balance would shift overnight. The ExComm. Kennedy formed a secret advisory group, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, ExComm. Inside this room, some pushed for immediate airstrikes. Others demanded a full-scale invasion. A few urged diplomacy. Kennedy chose a middle path, a naval quarantine, blockade, around Cuba to stop further Soviet shipments. The world holds its breath. From October 16 to 28, 1962, the world entered the most dangerous standoff in human history. Key moments. U.S. warships confronted Soviet vessels approaching Cuba. American forces moved to DEFCON 2, the highest alert ever reached except during actual war. A U-2 plane was shot down over Cuba, killing the pilot. Soviet missile crews were preparing launch sites. Miscommunication and fear on both sides created a hair-trigger environment. One misstep, one misunderstood signal, could have unleashed nuclear war. Back-channel diplomacy. Amid the tension, Kennedy and Khrushchev exchanged secret messages. The breakthrough came when the U.S. agreed not to invade Cuba. Quietly, the U.S. also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, but this part was kept secret to avoid political fallout. On October 28, Khrushchev publicly announced the removal of Soviet missiles from Cuba. The crisis ended, but only just. Aftermath. What changed forever? Immediate outcomes. The Soviet missiles were dismantled and shipped back. The U.S. lifted the naval blockade. The world exhaled. Winners and losers. publicly. Kennedy was praised for his calm, firm leadership. Khrushchev appeared to have backed down. Privately, both leaders understood how close they had come to catastrophe. Both recognized the need for better communication. Both leaders understood how close they had come to catastrophe. Both recognized the need for better communication. The hotline, a direct communication link, the Washington-Moscow hotline, was established to prevent future misunderstandings. Nuclear treaties. The crisis pushed both superpowers toward arms control. 1963, Limited Test Ban Treaty. Later, Non-Proliferation Treaty, 1968. Eventually, SALT and START agreements. Cuba's position. Castro felt betrayed by the Soviets for negotiating without him. Cuba remained isolated but survived as a communist state. The U.S. embargo hardened and continues in various forms to this day. Historical significance. The Cuban Missile Crisis is widely considered the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. A turning point that forced both superpowers to confront the reality of mutually assured destruction. A case study in leadership under extreme pressure. For TBK's Truth Frame, it's a powerful example of how miscalculations can escalate into global danger. How communication and restraint can save humanity. How leaders' decisions ripple across generations. In many ways, the Cuban Missile Crisis still echoes in today's world. Analysts often point to rising tensions involving Iran, its nuclear program, regional rivalries, and confrontations with global powers, as reminders of how quickly mistrust can escalate into international crisis. Just as in 1962, competing security fears, military posturing, and the absence of direct communication channels can push nations toward dangerous brinkmanship. The lesson from Kennedy's era is not about personalities or politics, but about the fragile line between caution and catastrophe. The Cuban standoff showed that even bitter adversaries can step back from the edge when dialogue, restraint, and an understanding of shared survival take precedence. In the current climate, that same wisdom feels as urgent as ever.